Dudes, what's happening? It's Trent here, and it's been a little while. But I'm back. I've been asked by Sketchbook Pro and Wacom to do an in-depth tutorial. So this is for them. They're officially sponsoring this video and this painting. And I've done some introduction to Sketchbook Pro in the past, like here's where all the menus are and here's how to create brushes and things like that. But this one really is going to be in-depth. It's going to talk about my process from start to finish and how I use Sketchbook Pro to do character designs and illustration techniques. So this is going to be a meaty one, dudes. So buckle up. Maybe get yourself a bowl of popcorn. Maybe put on a little bit of smooth music in the background. Pick up that Baja Blast Mountain Dew, 128 ounce. That's a lot, from Taco Bell. So the thing that you're going to want to do before you get into digital art is, of course, you're going to want to find yourself a handy Wacom tablet. I myself work on a MacBook Pro most of the time, and sometimes I hook that up to my Cintiq. But one of the things when I'm on the go, I like to get myself a Wacom Intuos Pro. I go with a medium size, and you can order it through their website at wacom.com. So it's springtime, so if you hear a lot of chainsaws going on in the background, it's no big deal. Nothing to be worried about. Anyway, so where do I start when I'm doing a drawing? I start with a series of thumbnails. This was actually kind of an idea. A friend of mine and I were talking about making this little fighting game online, and I wanted to have, I liked the idea of doing these sort of kind of a blend between the proportions that I see and that I love from old Final Fantasy games. That's like my specialty kind of a thing. And like the old Zelda games, and kind of blending that with the kind of military stuff that I love from Metal Gear. And so that's kind of where you get these interesting sort of shapes for silhouettes for these characters, you know, and things like that. And ultimately I ended up going with this dude right here. He ended up being a winner. I just loved his proportions and the scale of different elements. And this is really as far as I would go into detail on something like this. And if you were working in-house, you'd probably put together a whole sheet of these. And I might actually come back and do some of these other dudes, numbers 1, 2, 3, or 4. When you're doing a series of thumbnails, it's good to number them. That way when you're talking to a client or you're talking to somebody over the phone, they can go, oh yeah, I like the silhouette from number 4, but maybe with the swords or the gun from number 1, something like that. When you start a new canvas, you can adjust its size by going to the Image Canvas Size tab at the top and then adjusting the numbers as you see fit. I tend to go with something that's something close to like 4800 by 3400. I'll probably resize it later. Then I drop in my thumbnail and I adjust the opacity down to like maybe 20% or something like that. And that's like my silhouette. That's my basic shapes. And everything else is really just grabbing the most comfortable pencil from the pretty much standard brush sets that it comes with. I try to not do anything too crazy or funky because you should be able to follow along. I use mostly out of the box kind of brushes with this. I do get into customizing brushes later in some of my other tutorials, but for the most part, this is all on a new layer so that if I wanted to, I could just shut off that blocked out blob kind of a shape of the silhouette that I had underneath. As you can see, I've already gotten like kind of close to the edges of the canvas, and I know that I'm going to end up changing that. But I'm not really worrying too much about details too much at this point. I'm really just kind of like getting the flow of the character down, make sure that my proportions are pretty accurate to my thumbnail. If you tried to immediately draw these proportions full size, you wouldn't get as much of a scrunched shape. For my style, I actually, a little pro tip, little secret, I like to do little thumbnails really small because you get these kind of squatted proportions that read really easily when you squint your eyes or when the image is zoomed way out. And then when you zoom the image way in and then you do this process where you kind of use that as your blob or your silhouette shape, then you still have those proportions and you need to just add all this cool, crazy, funky detail and get nutty on top of that. For the face, I think I was inspired a little bit by some of the droids from Star Wars, but for the most part, as I said, I'm aiming for something that feels like something between like a cross between my two favorite games, Metal Gear and Zelda, and that's really what I was aiming for. I was thinking to myself, I don't need to worry too much about really overthinking the mechanical design, but I want it to be believable. And then I start to block in, I created a new layer here, and I started to block in some shadows. And again, I'm not really worrying too much about detail, and this is on a new layer so that I can back it off if I want to. If you create a new layer and then you set that layer to multiply, and then you just start filling in like solid chunks, you can really start to block out silhouettes and shapes within your shapes. And what I mean is like clustering some of your details. And that kind of helps it to just create an easier read. I still add in little things like key shapes here and there. If I wanted to make sure that I unify a really flat area, I'll add a circular element or some kind of like a padding or something like that. I really liked how Adam Jensen's armor was designed in the latest Deus Ex Machina game. Love it. Love those designs. It's like this kind of a muscle fiber, like a muscle suit. I think the first time I saw anything like that was in Crisis or Crisis 3, possibly. I don't remember, but I do remember they had like these kind of it was like a muscle suit. And then in Guns of the Patriots in Metal Gear Solid 4, Old Snake was wearing, he was wearing a muscle suit. And it's kind of, you spend half of the game really looking at Old Snake's butt. Downside of a cyborg muscle suit, you got bare butt cheeks sticking out. And I didn't really want that for his butt, if you could imagine this character from the backside. So I gave him some cool military pants. You'll notice that I tried to do a color pass. One thing that you can do, Sketchbook Pro has some cool features for coloring your line art and adding color to your value sketch. One of the things you can do is create a new layer and then set that layer to color mode. I wanted to interrupt the sort of time lapse to show you a little bit more of a clearer illustration of what I mean by that function. So here we have like a gray image, and let's say that we've sketched out, something that we've sketched out our details, all just using this sort of range of black and white. Well, if we create a new layer using this plus symbol up here, now that sits on top of the other layer. So anything we do with that, we can actually have it affect the layer below it. So let's say that we wanted that to be like a blue kind of a thing. We would just pick any old brush, with color, and then we lay that on top. We're just going to fill it really sloppy. It doesn't even matter which brush you use, but just so that for the sake of really communicating this, we just set this to color, and now our gradient is all in that color. And we can actually paint on this layer and create color on our values, and it preserves our gradient, our value gradient, all the way up, which is really kind of handy. You can play around with this and try a lot of different layer effects, such as multiply, or they have the ever famous dodge and linear burn. So the nice thing about that process is that we can really be freed up from worrying about material rendering. We don't have to worry too much about our specular or our reflectiveness or subsurface scattering or any of that stuff really right now. In fact, we can really just focus on the line art and the design and getting lost in drawing some cool details and just making this character interesting. Like, what can we do to just focus on the line art and the black and white? Let's not worry about reflectivity or exposure or camera lenses or focal points. And let's not worry about any of that and just focus on our grayscale, our values. Once we've reached a point where we're pretty comfortable with that, and we have our blobs in and our shapes, and some of our details are starting to take form, I use a combination of an overlay layer, a multiply layer, and a colorize layer. And you can dissect my files. Actually, you can see the process if you watch this in a normal speed. But for the sake of just sparing the internet and not breaking YouTube, I've condensed this down into a 30-minute video. I think it was originally, I spent about 10 hours on rendering this thing and designing this character. And ultimately, the colors aren't going to really matter. If your values are good, then it doesn't matter what your colors are. Now, this character is mostly going to be all metal anyway, so I wanted to sort of imply a kind of military kind of a color vibe. And some of this is really heavily inspired by Yoji Shinkawa, who is the Metal Gear art director and the concept artist from the old school Metal Gear games. And he uses these really flat colors, but he does a lot of cutouts with light. And you'll notice that as I progress through the image, I begin to like kind of carve out areas of highlights. And I just like that style. I wanted to run with it a little bit. Once I've settled on a kind of a color vibe, I pretty much stay consistent to it. I'll do big sweeping changes using color adjustment layers and things like that. Hey, so as I'm recording and editing the video for this, I realized I wanted to add a little bit more clarification to what I mean when I say color adjustments. And the way I do it in Sketchbook Pro is you'll notice that I'm on the layer where I have most of my information for my image, the color information. And this is the layer that I want to make adjustments to. Now I can adjust the opacity if I wanted to do that, but I'm going to talk about how to change the colors. So if we go up here to Image and Adjustments, and then we go to, let's go to Color Balance, and let's say we want to add a little bit more red into our image. You can see how it affects the preview here, and we can see that if we want to add more blue to our image, this is one way to do it. And if we hit Apply, it will apply it to our image. It'll take a little second because this is a rather large image file. So as you can see, it's impacted the whole image with the sliders that we've done and the adjustments that we've made. There are a number of options and features that you can do here. And so another option is that we could go to Image, Adjust, Hue and Saturation, and that's the window that you see here. We could change it to, we could change out all of our colors this way to create a little bit of a color variation. And this really gives us an opportunity to try a completely different color vibe for our piece. And actually that one's not bad, but we're not going to go with that because I've already recorded it and made my decisions. So I hope that gives you some insight into ways that you can adjust the colors in your own painting as well. And I'll make changes that way, but for the most part, I'm pretty much committing to the color vibes that I've got here for now. Now it goes back into the rendering mode again, which is really defining some of the design of things. And now that we know, okay, so these details are a little bit more in shadow and these other details are a little bit more in light and we can see them a little bit more clearly, we can really begin to put our emphasis on the design of things again. And again, we want to kind of we want to eliminate the challenge of figuring out, oh, what colors do I use? And also some of this I realize just comes from years and years of doing it. I think I was always very self-conscious about my colors. If you look at my old artwork from World of Warcraft, you can see that I was really lacking in my color knowledge. And I think over time, I just began to find colors that worked well together and a greater understanding. If you spend enough time in any software and with any tool, eventually you're going to get it down. You're going to start to find ways to make it work for you. And even here, you can see where I've begun to try to modify some of the brushes from Sketchbook Pro. This was the first time that I had ever really begun to modify them. And there is an option that allows you to change some of the shape of the capture, the shape of the brush itself, and the spacing between each one of those imprints of the brush, and also how much actual color is it putting into things, you know. Another trick that I like to do is to get a really nice metallic finish is to go in with a strong specular light. And really that's just whatever color is your light color that's hitting that surface. If your material is really metallic, it's going to have a lot more of a shine, which means a high contrast, high value contrast, and a high color contrast to whatever is on that surface. A good way to think of it is if you have like a flashlight pointed at a billiard ball, for instance, it's going to look very different than if you have a flashlight pointed at a tennis ball, because the tennis ball surface is not going to, it's not glass, it's not reflective, it doesn't have very much specular at all, so it's just going to absorb that color. It won't bounce anything shiny back at you. Now, one thing I like to do is I like to treat a lot of materials as if they have more reflectivity than they should. Just because it makes for interesting turning of forms. I get some criticism for this in some of my pieces. I like to do rim lighting, for instance. You can see like on a good example is his chest area. You can see like where there's the reflected light. It's just kind of almost blending in, and it creates an interesting negative space shape, which I personally I can get away with because I'm not working in-house anywhere. I'm not trying to match anybody else's style. I'm going completely rogue. I'm off the grid. I'm a lone wolf. I don't have to deal with a lot of the requirements of trying to match somebody else's art style. So I get to do it however the hell I want. And this is the way I like to do it. Anyway, so I reached a point with the drawing where I had the basic stuff in, and I kind of had, like, I knew, okay, so here's the design. He's kind of worked out for the most part. I knew what to do with him, and I even had some of the kind of the large blocky shapes. You'll notice that the way that I block out technology or devices, mechanical design, is I tend to create these cubes, like odd shaped proportions, and I establish shapes and proportions with these giant cylinders and cubes. And then I go in and I add a lot more to it. Now, like how those shapes and cubes and cylinders and whatnot fit together, I think becomes very important. And now every now and then I'll thumb through like a technical manual or something like that. But I'm not exactly like studying how do these things work. I couldn't really explain to you, for instance, like how or why the bottom of the handle of the gun has that plate kind of sliding off of the side. Other than that, I wanted to just go a little bit bonkers with the design of it. I wanted to just add the kind of details that you see in some of my more recent pieces where there is an obvious intentional, it might be a release button, it might be a safety button, it might just be in the case of the clip, it might just very well be that this little disc, this lit up disc, is kind of an indicator as to how much ammo is left in the clip. It could be that. I really just wanted to imply functionality without digging too much into it. Now, if I did, I'd spend probably 8 hours trying to communicate how a clip works in this type of energy weapon, this heavy assault rifle that it's not even firing physical shells of any kind. It could be like a plasma cannon kind of a gun. And I really didn't even want to deal with trying to explain that. I was thinking of it like some kind of a Protoss energy weapon of sorts. You know what I mean? My perspective on the gun was off. It was jacked. And it wasn't until I had already drawn it and done a lot of detailing that I began to realize that. So I went in, and there is a selection tool in Sketchbook Pro. It's right up next to the undo and redo button, or the magnifying glass, and you can actually select an area and then use the transform tool next to that to skew it and shape it. And so I did go in and do that later, and you'll see how that changed towards the end. I really wanted to avoid that hand. I think that's like the last thing that I did in the whole piece. Whenever I see a very plain area or a series of horizontal or vertical parallel lines, I go in and try to add something to break up those perfectly parallel lines, unless if those perfectly parallel lines are guiding the viewer to a very specific point in the painting where I want him to look. For the pants, I felt like they were just getting a little bit too plain. So I thought back to a little bit of, my go-to for reference. And if I recall, Big Boss sported a diamond pattern leather jacket in the Phantom Pain. So I thought, hey, it kind of looks like almost maybe like some kind of flame retardant kind of a pattern or material. So a little subtle nod to the diamond dogs there. Very, very small little detail. I started to add in some little extra pipes and maybe breathing tubes and things like that to really draw the viewer's eye a little bit more towards the head of the robot. I wanted to add a little bit of maybe like a purple color to the eyes. So that way, when you're looking at it, it's more of like the first thing that you notice. Although, in hindsight, big takeaway from this one, if you're going to do a robot head, I think I just didn't do enough to make it stand out. And in fact, while this is one of my favorite robot designs, when I was doing the thumbnail for it, you probably can't really even tell what it is exactly. So there were some things there that I think I could have done better with the head design, specifically, around like the jaw, and maybe even given him a little bit more humanoid type of facial features, even though it kind of just looks like a human head with like I don't know, some kind of lenses or glasses. Maybe his eyes need to be bigger. I'm not entirely sure on that, but at some point I just kind of went, and that's a big question. I think that some people might be wondering is like, when do you know when to stop with something? And I think that sometimes you just have to cap it at a certain amount of time. Like I said, my plan was to spend about 10 hours on this painting. And then, I think I've spent about maybe like 3 or 4 hours doing the video editing and recording. It's a lot more work than you might realize. Before I do any project, I try to lay out a budget of time. I try to lay out a budget of how much can I give this project? How much time can I spend on this before I begin? And that's my yardstick. That's how I know when to stop. And I feel like the detail level was good. I feel like the character design is cool. He definitely matches that previous image that I had done of the Hana Solo character designs that is so prominently featured on the loading screen for Sketchbook Pro. I feel like they could fit into the same universe, even though this one is a little bit more designed for, specifically requested by Wacom. In terms of his functionality and his factions, I think that he's really just missing a couple of emblems and logos, and he could be easily tied into a different faction within the same universe as her. Although possibly at ends, I wouldn't imagine that they would be on the same side, but who knows? That's all part of the creative process. I haven't written any story for these characters. Really, it was just the influence and inspiration that I was pulling from my reference books. I don't know if I've mentioned this, I'm becoming a little bit more of a minimalist. And what that means is I only play one game at a time. And when I buy an art book, I only have 1 or 2 art books on my shelf at any given time. Everything else goes into storage or I sell it. And it just gives me an opportunity to really appreciate the simpler things, appreciate having less, and focus on appreciating the fewer things that I have. It all goes back to when I was a kid. I used to get a couple of games a year and I would treasure them. I would play them to just every degree, trying to find every secret room and every secret little thing. I'd talk to my friends about it and go, hey, how did you get into that thing? Or how'd you get that weapon? And somehow that got away from me and I wanted to go back to it. Well, the 2 art books that I have out now that really matter a lot to me are the art of Metal Gear Solid 5, The Phantom Pain, and also the art and artifacts of The Legend of Zelda. These 2 books are really having a lot of impact on me, and whenever I sit down at my art desk, those are the 2 books that I see, and they're really the inspiration for this character design. I've also tried to apply the same philosophy to projects that I do, because I always have about 10 different projects going at once, and I've found that if I just focus on one at a time until it's finished, or until I've scheduled for it to be finished, I make a lot of progress, actually. I'm not dancing around to different projects all the time. There's one last thing that I really wanted to cover while I'm here, while I'm working on this piece with you, and that is, this is the final Sketchbook Pro tip for this video. Somebody had asked me, how did I get the glow effects that you see, and what are some techniques for getting the glow effect? I would create a new layer, set that layer to glow. It's literally a layer effect, and just select yourself an airbrush, perhaps, and pick a cool color. Pick a color that you want to have glowing. In this case, we're going to go purple, and then just start to paint in to the area. We're going to go extreme so that you can see it, and just pop out all of those blues wherever you see them. I have a little bit of a purple to my blue that kind of makes it really stand out a little bit more. And you want to be careful with glow because well, one, you need the area behind it to be kind of dark, because if you do glow in a lighter area, it doesn't show up as much. And 2, keep in mind that it's going to really saturate. So wherever you have a strong saturation, it's going to pull the audience's eye directly at that area. So this doesn't look particularly good, but you should get an idea of how the glow works. There are other ways. For instance, there is a glow brush that you can use that's already set up, but it's an extreme level of glow. So use this with caution, okay? Otherwise you end up with something that looks like the electric light parade from Disneyland. Okay. Final touches on this piece, just adding in a little bit of lighting here and there. I did go to the image adjustments tab, and I made a couple of different color adjustments. I added a glow a little bit to bring in the warm light coming from the right side and really emphasize that green and the cool colors coming off of the left. I realize there's not a lot of color diversity in this image, but ultimately I'm really happy with it. I feel like it captures the mood and energy that I wanted. I do think I could do better with the head. It's going to be a difficult challenge to create robots with like really relatable humanistic kind of features in the face. But anyway, I want to thank Wacom specifically and Sketchbook Pro for hosting this party for this one. They are official sponsors now, so you're going to be seeing a lot more of videos and tutorials in Sketchbook Pro coming from those guys in the next few months. So look forward to that. And I want to thank you guys so much for stopping by. You truly are the best. And remember, dudes, if you're going to draw a heavy cyborg dude, draw a heavy cyborg dude with some passion. All right, dudes, I'll catch you in the next video. Ciao, baby.